Wyoming Territory, May of 1883. The wind carried dust across the empty plains, and when Adelaide Rourke opened the door to her new homestead, she found a baby wrapped in a faded quilt, blinking up at her with wide, tear-rimmed eyes. She stared, frozen on the threshold of the clapboard house she had arrived at only 2 days earlier. Her trunk still sat half unpacked. The man she had come to marry had died of a fever 3 weeks before her train even reached Cheyenne. An apologetic letter from his cousin had met her at the station. She had followed through anyway, stubborn, hard-bruised, with nowhere else to go. But now there was a child. Left in the dust. Left to her. A note was pinned to the cloth. "His name is Waylon. I can't keep him. Please, someone love him. Please." Adelaide knelt slowly, her traveling skirt brushing the earth. The boy could not have been more than a year old. His lips were dry. His cheeks flushed from heat or tears. She lifted him, tucked him against her shoulder, and closed the door behind her. That night, she rocked him by the window, candlelight flickering over the wood plank walls. He did not cry. He only stared at her chest, his fingers curled in her sleeve like he already knew she would not leave. "I guess it's just us now," she whispered. "You and me, Waylon." The next morning, she stumbled through the barn with Waylon on her hip, trying to figure out how to hitch the mule and get to the nearest town. She had a list of supplies, no milk, and only a handful of coins. "You planning to wrestle that harness all morning, or would you like a hand?" a voice called from the open barn door. She turned, startled. A man stood in the sun, his hat in his hand, dust on his boots. Tall, broad-shouldered, maybe 30. His eyes were the color of overcast sky. Weathered. Steady. "I heard someone moved into the old Tiller place," he said. "Name's Quentin Boone. I work cattle west of the ridge." Adelaide adjusted Waylon on her hip. "I am Adelaide Rourke. I was supposed to marry Mr. Tiller. But he died. I came anyway." Quentin nodded once, like none of it surprised him. "You need help." "I do," she said, not proud, just plain honest. "Let me hitch the mule. I will take you into town." They rode in the wagon, dust curling up behind them, Waylon asleep against her chest. Quentin drove without speaking, the reins loose in his hands. At the general store, he carried the flour sack and milk can without being asked. He paid for the baby's bottle when she hesitated too long at the counter. "I will pay you back," she said, lifting her chin. "You do not owe me," he said. "It is for the boy." They rode back in silence. Wind moved through the grass like waves. Adelaide glanced sideways at him once, the way his jaw moved slightly when he drove, the way he kept glancing toward the back to make sure the supplies had not shifted. "You do not ask many questions," she said. "You look like you have had enough of them." She blinked, surprised. Quentin glanced at her. "The boy yours?" "No," she said quietly. "I found him on my doorstep this morning." He said nothing for a long time. Then, "You are still rocking him like he is." She looked down. Her hand was swaying gently, even though Waylon slept. She had not noticed. That evening, Quentin stayed to help with the fencing. She cooked beans and cornbread over the fire, the baby in the crook of her arm, and when she handed Quentin a plate, he took it like it meant something. "Thank you," he said, quiet. She sat beside him on the porch steps. Waylon's breath was soft against her collarbone. "I do not know what I am doing," she admitted, "with any of this. Marriage. Orphans. Wyoming. You are doing just fine," Quentin said. "How would you know?" He looked at her then, long and slow. "Because that boy is already holding on to you like he belongs." "And you let him." Adelaide swallowed. The wind was cool on her cheeks. She said, "I do not mind that he does." When he stood to leave, he touched the brim of his hat, but his fingers hesitated. "I will come by in the morning. You should not be alone out here. Not with a child." "You do not have to," she said. "I know." He came every day after that. He fixed the back gate and helped her mend the chicken coop. He brought a small cradle someone had left in his barn a year ago. He brought milk from his neighbor's cow. One afternoon, he stayed late and chopped wood until the sun dropped low and shadows crept across the prairie. Adelaide made stew, and they ate by the fire while Waylon played with a button on Quentin's coat. "I was not expecting this," she said suddenly. Quentin looked at her. "Which part?" "All of it. The baby. You. The way things feel. Less heavy when you are around." He stared at the fire. Then he said, "I lost a sister when I was 16. She was younger than you. Took care of me when our ma passed. After she died, I stopped talking much." Did not see the point. Adelaide's heart ached at the quiet in his voice. She reached over and touched his hand. He did not pull away. "I am glad you came by that day," she said. He met her eyes. "So am I." Waylon crawled into her lap, and she cradled him close. Quentin held her gaze for a second longer, then looked down at their hands. His fingers curled around hers. He stayed until the fire burned low. When he left, he looked back once before disappearing into the dark. Adelaide stood in the doorway, Waylon asleep on her shoulder, and for the first time in weeks, she felt something settle in her chest, not fear, not doubt. Hope. And something else, too. Something like falling. The rains came late that spring, slow and soaking, turning the dry land dark and rich beneath the sky's gray hush. By the time Adelaide stepped out with Waylon bundled against her chest, the cottonwoods beyond the creek had leafed in full, their branches whispering, heavy with green. She'd found a rhythm, halting though it was feeding the boy before sunup, checking the chicken feed, kneading bread dough while he teethed on a wooden spoon. The days were long, but there was no emptiness in them. Not anymore. Quentin arrived just before noon, his hat damp with drizzle, a small parcel tied in oilcloth tucked under his arm. "Heard the preacher's wife was looking to pass along some things her youngest outgrew," he said, handing her the bundle. "Figured Waylon's near the size." Adelaide untied the cloth to find a pair of soft-soled shoes and a faded flannel shirt, small enough to fit in her palm. She brushed her thumb over the stitching, then looked up. "You always seem to know just what we need." Quentin shrugged and stepped back to knock the mud from his boots. "I just listen better than most." She watched him remove his coat and hang it near the hearth without asking. It was the first time he'd come inside without waiting for an invitation. Waylon reached toward him from her hip, fingers outstretched. Quentin took the boy and lifted him easily, resting him on one arm while he crouched to examine the kindling pile. "You been burning green wood?" he asked, poking the stack with one finger. "I've been burning whatever I could split," she said, brushing her skirts smooth. He gave a low chuckle. "There's seasoned oak behind my shed. Let me bring you some before the next cold snap." She hesitated. "It's not your burden." "Doesn't feel like one," he said, not looking at her. Adelaide walked to the stove, her back to him, hands busy with the kettle. "You never talk about your homestead. Or your people. They're buried near Fort Laramie," he said, quiet. "All of them. I worked cattle after. Took up land when the government opened the valley." She turned. "You stay out there alone?" He nodded. "I don't mind the quiet. I used to think I didn't either," she said. Quentin looked at her then, Waylon's hand curled around his shirt collar. "You don't talk much about why you came." "Not really." She pressed her palms flat on the table. "I had nothing left in Missouri. My father passed 2 winters ago. My sister married a man who didn't have room for me. I thought this would be a life I could build with someone." He didn't speak right away. Then, "That someone may not be here, but the life still can be." Waylon babbled softly, tugging at Quentin's hair. Adelaide sat across from him, kettle forgotten. A breeze crept through the cracks in the window frame, carrying the smell of wet soil and something faintly sweet wild chokecherry blooming on the hill. "I keep thinking someone might return for him," she said. Quentin studied her, his thumb brushing the boy's shoulder. "But you'd still keep him, wouldn't you?" She nodded once. You think that makes you foolish? No, she said. It makes me frightened. Quentin leaned forward, his voice low. You don't have to be. That evening, after he'd gone, Adelaide stayed by the fire with Waylon asleep in her arms. The cradle sat unused, his breath rising and falling against her. The rain tapped the glass like a soft reminder, steady and true. She reached for the small flannel shirt Quentin had brought and folded it carefully, setting it beside her on the bench. She hadn't spoken the word aloud, not even to herself. But it settled around her now, close as breath. Belonging. By mid-June, the soil around the house had dried enough for planting. Adelaide stood barefoot on the edge of the garden plot, skirts tucked up, Waylon balanced on her hip, his head turned toward the wind. She'd spent the morning turning earth with an old spade she'd found under the porch, her arms aching but her mind steady. Quentin arrived just after the noon bell from town would have rung, had they been close enough to hear it. He carried a burlap sack over one shoulder and a woven basket in the other. You'll wear yourself out doing it by hand, he said, setting the basket down near the well. I don't have a plow, she said, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. And I don't have a team. Quentin nodded toward the hills. You've got me. She squinted at him, the sun behind his shoulder. You have cattle to tend. I checked them at dawn. They're grazing easy. I've got the rest of the day, if you'll let me work it. She stood there for a moment, too tired to argue, too proud to thank him again. He took the silence as permission and fetched a short-handled hoe from the barn wall. Waylon reached toward him, arms out, and Quentin scooped him up without pause. You ever plant by the moon? He asked as he knelt at the edge of the tilled strip, letting Waylon tug at the hem of his sleeve. I never planted anything at all, she said. He looked up. Then I'll show you. They worked until the sun lowered behind the pines. Adelaide dropped seeds into the furrows he carved, watching his hands quick and sure as he cleared each row. Waylon sat in the shade of the water barrel with a tin spoon and a piece of bark, content as any child she'd ever seen. As the light faded, Quentin straightened and rolled his sleeves back down. You'll want to water it before night. She turned toward the well. I'll haul the buckets. He reached for the rope. No. You go inside and rest. She hesitated. You don't have to, I want to, he said without looking at her. Inside, she poured a bit of cider into a tin cup and stood at the window, watching him bend to check the soil's moisture with his fingertips. There was no rush in him, no show. Just steady care. When he came in, boots damp and shirt clinging to his back, she handed him the cup. He drank, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and leaned against the doorframe. You've made a start here, he said. It still feels like I'm only borrowing it. He looked at her, quiet for a long moment. Do you want to stay? I don't know anything else. That's not what I asked. She folded the washcloth over the basin. I want to grow something that lasts. You already are. He stepped toward her, slow, like he wasn't sure she'd let him. She didn't move. Waylon's already yours, he said. He knows it. Her voice caught. I didn't know I could be someone's mother. You're already doing it. She looked down. And what are you doing? He didn't answer right away. Then, waiting for you to ask me to stay. Her breath stilled. She looked up at him, and there was no weight in her chest, no ache. Only warmth and something solid and real. I want you here, she said. He reached for her hand. Then I will be. Waylon stirred in the cradle, and Quentin moved to him, lifting him gently. The boy blinked once, then laid his head on Quentin's shoulder, as if he'd done it his whole life. Adelaide watched them, the man and the child. Then she crossed the floor, and without hesitation, stood beside them, her hand resting at Quentin's back, her cheek against Waylon's curls. The night settled softly around them, and for the first time, the house felt full. By July, the days came hot and dry, the kind of heat that settled into your clothes and stayed long after the sun dipped behind the cottonwoods. Adelaide kept wet cloths by the door and a tin basin half filled near the well, rinsing Wayland's hands and neck as the afternoons stretched heavy. Quentin built a lean-to beside the barn one morning, hammering without pause, sweat darkening the back of his shirt. Adelaide stood nearby with a dipped ladle of water, watching the way he measured each board against his boot before cutting. "Why the extra shelter?" she asked, handing him the tin. "Shade for the horse. Yours is moving slower these days. She's earned better than an open yard." "She's not mine," Adelaide said softly. "You're the only one feeding her now." Adelaide looked toward the mule, dozing under a tree. "You always make things better without asking." He took a slow drink, then poured the rest over his neck. "I don't believe in waiting to be told what's right." After supper, Wayland crawled beneath the kitchen table, chasing a wooden block. Quentin crouched to fish it out, but Adelaide waved him off and ducked down herself. When she came back up, laughing, her hair tumbled loose from its pins and fell over her shoulders, thick and dark and damp at the ends. Quentin's eyes didn't leave her. "You should wear it down more," he said. "I haven't," she said, brushing it back. "Since before Missouri. You should still." She stood, her hands still in her hair, and something unspoken passed between them, quiet and warm. Later, Quentin brought in a bucket from the spring, setting it beside the hearth. Wayland, already dozing, curled into the crook of Adelaide's arm on the rocker. She didn't rise, didn't move except to angle her body so the boy's head wouldn't roll. "You ever think about the winter?" Quentin asked. Adelaide's eyes stayed on the fire. "Not yet. You'll need more than what you've put up." "I know. I can help." She looked at him then, her voice low. "You already do. I mean more permanent." He didn't say anything else, didn't press. Just sat on the bench, hands resting on his knees. Adelaide studied the way he filled the space, quiet, certain, like he'd always meant to be there. She rose and laid Wayland gently in the cradle, smoothing the quilt over his belly. Then she turned. "I don't know what we are," she said, "but I don't want it to stop." Quentin stood. The shadows moved across his face, and he stepped closer, close enough she could see the pale scar near his temple, the one he never spoke of. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. She laid her hand against his chest, fingers splayed over the cotton of his shirt. He covered her hand with his. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the leaves with a dry hush that promised cooler nights ahead. Inside, they stood together, steady as roots beneath the soil, no declarations, just the truth of it between them. The first frost came early that autumn, silvering the porch railings and curling the edges of the garden leaves. Adelaide watched her breath rise in quiet clouds as she pulled Wayland's knitted bonnet snug under his chin. His cheeks were flushed from sleep, his hands warm against her collarbone. Inside, Quentin stirred the coals in the stove, the hush of metal against ash the only sound in the room. He had begun sleeping in the lean-to he'd built, claiming it gave him time alone with the stars. But Adelaide knew he stayed close in case the wind turned violent, or the roof groaned with weight. That morning, she found him folding a wool blanket with care, his hands moving with the same quiet purpose they always had. "I wrote to a man in Laramie," he said. "He's got a team of oxen and an extra sled. Said he'll lend them if we can pay in labor come spring." She nodded, hands tightening around Wayland's legs. "We'll need it for hauling wood from the lowlands." He met her eyes. "That's not all." She waited. "I asked him about the process for land transfer. Legal guardianship, too. If we're to live like this, we should mean it." Adelaide set Wayland down gently in the cradle and crossed the room. "You're saying it plain now." "I am." She reached for his hand. "Then I will too." Quentin's voice dropped. "I want this to be our home. Not just a place I visit when the work's light." She stepped closer until their foreheads touched. "Then stay. Not beside it. In it." He kissed her there, soft and firm, like he'd been waiting for the right hour. She leaned into it, her hand resting over his heart. No more waiting. No more borrowed time. That Sunday, They drove the wagon to the chapel 4 miles east, Wayland bundled against Adelaide's chest, his eyes wide in the cold. The preacher's fingers trembled with age as he read the vows. Quentin's voice didn't waver once. Adelaide's hand in his felt like something carved from the land itself, weathered, enduring, strong. They returned home with the light already fading. Quentin lifted Wayland from the wagon, his arms steady. Adelaide opened the door to the scent of dried herbs and wood smoke. It no longer felt like someone else's house. That winter they lived close. Quentin carved a wooden step for Wayland to climb beside the hearth. Adelaide stitched curtains from flour sacks, each hem a little straighter than the last. They read aloud from the one book she had brought from Missouri, its pages worn soft with touch. At night, with the fire low and wind pressing against the walls, they lay beneath a shared quilt, her head on his chest, his hand tracing slow circles against her back. One evening in February, Adelaide found Quentin fitting a carved board above the doorway. The letters were simple, unadorned, Rourke Boone. He looked at her when he stepped back. "It's yours too," he said. She smiled, the kind that settled deep and stayed. By the time the thaw came, the garden rows were already planned, the tools cleaned and sharpened. Quentin built a bench beside the chicken coop, and Wayland tottered toward it with a stick in his hand, calling out for him. Quentin lifted him high and turned once in the air, the boys' laughter ringing across the yard. Adelaide stood at the porch, one hand resting on the post. She didn't need to speak. Everything she had ever hoped for, steadiness, belonging, love that did not ask to be proven, stood before her. Years later, the house still stood, the porch worn smooth by boots and time. Wayland grew tall and strong, his voice sure, his steps confident in the land he called home. Quentin repaired the fence every spring, his shoulder brushing Adelaide's when they rested side by side on the porch bench, watching dusk settle over the fields they had sown and reaped together. And when the wind came soft through the grass, it carried laughter, and the scent of bread baking slow in the oven, and the sound of Quentin's voice low as he read aloud by firelight, his hand still finding hers in the quiet. There was no doubt in any corner of their lives. No shadows left unlit. They had found each other in a world that had tried to strip them bare. And they had made something lasting. Together.